Hello again, this is UML Operator. All right, in this session, we're going to take a deeper dive into telling your story. So in modeling, whether we're talking about computer-aided software engineering, CASE, Unified Modeling Language, UML, or other forms of CAD, computer-aided design, the whole purpose of modeling is to tell your story. So when we look at an architect or engineer, an architect is creative while an engineer is logical. There's other perspectives, such as a requirements engineer working with the stakeholders. Requirement engineers follow a defined and repeatable practice or processes, starting with elicitation, then analysis, followed by specification, and closing with validation. In this session, we're going to use this template we created several months ago to show how you can use modeling to drive content, and the example was for YouTube channel. So you can see here that any content streamer starts with an intro or introduction, leads into what the subject is, then provides content. That content could be made up of many chapters that are generalized from the content subject itself. And then we have a recap, and then you can see that it includes an outro. So very simple, 5 different areas of providing content, and then whatever the subject matter is for that content is being used. And we're going to also, by the end of the video, step through a very simple model that has 2 class elements in it, and we're going to tell a story about this user and an experience. We're actually going to use this template to drive the content that you're watching, the story that we're telling, and in this particular case, it's a deeper dive from the previous video into telling your story using modeling. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a blank template for this storyboard using a pattern, and I'll talk more about patterns as we're going forward. So in our pattern repository, we happen to have a pattern for telling a story, and it's simply called full storyboard. And let's look at that. So essentially what the template looks like is the intro, subject, content, some generalized cells or elements for the content, a recap, and an outro. So yes, we want to use this pattern, and we have our blank model. And what we're going to do is we can drag and drop this in, but we're going to right click here, add pattern to diagram, and hit OK. And there we go. This pattern's being added to this blank document that is going to start a certain session in driving content. Now, the content can be for YouTube. It can be for a PowerPoint presentation. It could be for a short story you're writing, or even a novel. I've even had people come up to me that are starting documentaries or movies, and they want a way to storyboard that's not going to cost them the farm. So we've used Sparks, and we've used other modeling tool to actually drive their storyboard prior to spending one dime on production. Now we'll come back to this template a little bit later on in this session, but what I want to talk about is checklists and guides. So anytime that you're driving a story, I want to say writing a book, driving a story, creating content, even planning for a PowerPoint presentation with your client stakeholders, there's a certain repeatable and defined practice or process in doing so. And having a checklist helps you go through and ensure that you've covered everything necessary for driving the content that you want to present. So we're going to go back to our original storyboard for this subject, and you can see the first checklist we have here is the production checklist. And there's things that we've got to do in order to reach the objective or milestone of publishing this content, in this case, publishing a video to YouTube. Then we have various checklists that we want to go through, just like piloting a plane or anything else that requires some safety and quality of assurance that you're making happen or checking off prior to starting and or completing a particular effort. Maybe I should have water, coffee, or drink something prior to starting talking in my checklist, right? So another important thing that you should do prior to starting any effort, software development effort, solution architecture, requirements development or elicitation, is testing. You test from the very beginning to the very end of any effort. So what you can see here is we've got a test case here that is driving various testing scenarios. And in this case, we have two tests. We've got integration testing right here, classes integration, and we have acceptance testing that's taking place. So you want to make sure that you're testing the quality of the content that you're presenting. So we build test cases into the template that we use as a repeatable and defined practice in delivering content or telling your story. Now I want to get back to our template, and you might be defining your own template for multiple purposes, whether it's architecture you're presenting to your stakeholders, or whether it's a PowerPoint presentation, or whether you're writing a book, right? Publishing a video in this case, right? So I want to get back to it. And from here, we're going to create a pattern. So we go to the specialized tab, and then in technologies, I have a video on this, so don't worry if you miss anything. Publish diagram as pattern. I select it, I get a dialog box. I can name the pattern. You're going to whatever I want to name it, convention, again, talk about that in that video. The category it's going to be under, in this case, it's the storyboard pattern. So we want to make sure that we're consistent on our category naming. Version the pattern, put it into a repository where you store your patterns. It has all the elements that you've selected. You hit OK, and you have a pattern that you can bring in and use in other projects, all right, using that XML, that pattern XML. However, what I also do is I'll go to publish, I'll go to reusable asset services, I'll log into my RAS, and then I have a storage area for patterns, and this happens to be the pattern that we're using. So I'll version the pattern. In this case, we're at version 0.10 in it, published on this date and time, with metadata associated to it. However, I don't use RAS as I'm building projects. I use the pattern. So there's something called reference data. And so I store everything that's relevant to projects that I'm working on in RAS under reference data. And in this particular case, patterns are under the UML operator based reference data, and then originally created at this date and time. So I go into any project, and I'm able to go to my pattern repository, import that in, right click, import pattern, and bring it in as a reusable pattern to be used in all projects going forward. Next, I want to talk about adding extras into your story, and in this case, story template. So publishing a YouTube video, there's something called end screens, and we've created a pattern here for what end screen configuration we're going to use, down to even what videos we're going to include in the end screen when we're publishing. And again, this could be for a PowerPoint presentation or any presentation that you're making to your stakeholders. So we also have cards in YouTube. And as we're going through and producing content, we want to choose certain other content that we want to inject or share during specific timing in the production. And in this case, we use this extra here to tell what cards we want to add, as well as end screens. Now let's jump over to our telling a story example here. We have two class elements. We've got one that's a user and one that is experience. And then we have three relationships, connectors, associations. One is a composite association we talked about in previous video with a stereotype of subscribe. And so when we look at, make this a little wider here, when we look at traceability right here, and we select user, we can see that user is associated to experience. We can see using aggregation that user is part of experience. And then we can see the dependency, user is dependent on experience, calls that experience. We also have 3 requirements down here, requirement elements, and they have a relationship with experience using the connector type realization. And what this means when we look over in traceability, telling our story, ability to join, this requirement here, implements experience, realizes experience, and is needed by this feature down here, which has a trace dependency in it. And when we look over at the next requirement, the ability to view content implements experience, and the ability to provide feedback or comment implements experience. So here we're telling a story using relationships, connector types that were explained in the previous video. All right, so let's get back over to our story that we're telling. Make this a little wider so we can see it. And so the next item that we're going to talk about is publishing your story. So when we go back to telling your story, we have created 3 reports to publish that can be digital copies, they can be published to a web, or of course you can kill some trees here and print them out on paper. The first one is model report. And this is a full description of all the model elements that are here. Let's go ahead and launch this from using this hyperlink. And here you see we're explaining everything that's in this model and telling our story. Every element, its association or relationship with the story or the model, the diagram that we're talking about. The next one is scope analysis. This one's from the requirement engineer's perspective. So when we open this is the requirement engineer using the same intelligence that's underneath this model to tell or present their story regarding scope. So each one of the scope elements, the nouns and verbs that are in the scope, version, their connectivity, and so on, right? And then the last one is from the solution architect's perspective. And there we have solution analysis, looking at the model, looking at the class elements, the systems, the elements, objects. Here's experience and showing the relevance from that class element to other elements and explaining what's going on within those relationships. And here's the user and so on. So the solution architect can provide their perspective in report form. And then there certainly are many other reports that you can publish, talk about that in the reporting video, and cover the needs of your stakeholders to ensure that they understand the story, the model, the diagram that's being presented to satisfy their needs. Let's go back to our storyboard here. And the last item that's on our storyboard is organizing your stories. So I talk about this in other videos as well. These are cover pages that basically give a point where users can navigate, whether it's from the model themselves, from a website, or Sparks EA Prolaborate. So we're using Kanban as our cover page. So this is the model that's loaded by default when the stakeholders load this project. If you publish to the web, this can actually be your cover page. We're going to do this in a second. That helps navigate to the particular models and items that you're talking about. So in this case, here's the package for the catalog itself. This allows users to get to the storyboard. This allows users to get to the telling a story example that we're using in our demonstration. So having a cover page is mission critical in understanding the work and the delivery that you're focused on. All right, so let's publish our story, our models to a website. So we're going to go to publish in the model reports group. We're going to go to HTML, standard HTML report. Go ahead and accept the defaults, hit generate. We're going to include glossary, test cases. Let's see what comes out. There we go, it's published. And here we are on the web. So we've got our cover page. We're able to navigate to the storyboard. We have navigation over on the left so that we can look at various subjects and what's going on. We can navigate back. We can go to telling a story model that we did, and again, navigate through all the content and the intelligence that's here. Look at the relevant associations, any other intelligence you provided or links. Advanced, I don't need to get into that. And now we're out on the web with the storyboard and the content that we created during this session. All right, that concludes this session today on storytelling, telling your own story, a deeper dive from our previous video on storytelling and traceability. And we covered quite a bit today. We talked about using a template, a reusable template for being consistent and repeatable in the stories that we're telling, how we're defining our architecture. You can really do anything in UML or computer-aided design in driving your architecture delivery or any delivery. So thanks again for watching. Until the next time we talk, happy modeling.